Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Ivy had never seen anything like it. The shadow, dark and slick as oil, danced across her fingertips, twisting and shifting with each small movement of her hand. She could feel it pulsing as if it were alive. Her heart pounded in her chest, unsure whether to be thrilled or terrified by this discovery. She had come to the arcane university for answers, but what she found in the ancient scrolls was something far beyond what she'd ever imagined. As the shadow flickered away, evaporating into nothingness, Ivy gasps for air, her lungs burning. The old library, filled with shelves stacked high with forgotten knowledge, seemed to close in on her. She steadied herself, the echo of footsteps reminding her that she wasn't alone. Grabbing her bag and the scroll she'd been studying, she made a quick escape into the narrow hallway. Shadewell was a city divided. Ivy had grown up here in the capital of Evershade, where the blend of magic and machinery had shaped every corner of society. Tall, spindly towers of glass and steel rose alongside ancient stone citadels, their walls covered in ivy and magic-infused ruin. For years, the balance between magic and technology had been precarious, but now it was crumbling. Strange phenomena were becoming more frequent: machines malfunctioning, spells backfiring. Whispers of shadow-related incidents had begun spreading like wildfire, and Ivy had just experienced one of her own. She hurried down the cobbled streets, her cloak pulled tightly around her. The air smelled of smoke and metal, a constant reminder of Shadewell's industrial core. But it wasn't just the smell that had Ivy on edge. It was the growing tension in the city. People were nervous, and Ivy could feel the weight of their anxiety pressing against her like a heavy fog. It didn't help that she now carried a secret, a power she barely understood, but one that seemed to be the root of the chaos stirring in Evershade. Ivy turned a corner into a dark alley, her mind racing. She needed help, someone who understood technology, and there was only one person she trusted for that: Jack. Jack's workshop was tucked away in a forgotten district where the sounds of the city faded into a low hum. Ivy knocked on the metal door, a rhythmic pattern only he would recognize. After a few tense moments, the door creaked open, and a man with oil-stained hands and sharp, calculating eyes appeared. Jack wiped his hands on a rag, staring at her suspiciously. "You have been avoiding me," he said, stepping aside to let her in. She didn't respond immediately. She walked into the cluttered workshop, filled with half-built machines, glowing crystals, and contraptions that hummed with both magic and mechanical energy. The air smelled of grease and burnt ozone. Jack's mind was a labyrinth of invention, constantly creating things that pushed the boundaries of what was possible between magic and technology. If anyone could help her understand what she'd uncovered, it was him. "I wasn't avoiding you," Ivy muttered, glancing around the room. "I've been busy." Jack raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Busy getting yourself into trouble, I assume." Maybe she pulled out the scroll and unrolled it on his workbench. "I found something." Jack leaned in, his curiosity piqued. The scroll was old, the parchment yellowed and brittle, but the markings were unmistakable, symbols of the ancient Shadow Guild. Jack's brow furrowed. "Where did you get this?" he asked, tracing the symbols with a finger. "Arcane University," Ivy replied. "It's connected to the shadows, the ones causing all this chaos in the city." Jack's expression darkened. He knew about the rumors, about the incidents where technology and magic had both failed catastrophically. But this was different. "You shouldn't be messing with this, Ivy." "I don't have a choice," she said quietly, her voice tinged with frustration. I think I have a connection to it. The shadows, they respond to me." Jack's eyes widened. "What do you mean, they respond to you?" Ia held out her hand, and with a concentrated thought, the shadows began to swirl at her fingertips again. Jack's sense jaw tightened. He took a step back, eyeing the dark energy warily. "This is dangerous," he said in a low voice. "You don't tell what you're dealing with." "I know that something bad is coming," Ivy said, letting the shadows fade. "And I know I need to figure this out before it's too late." Before Jack could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Jack tensed, grabbing a small mechanical device from his bed. Ivy stood still, her heart racing. The knock came again this time, more insistent. "Expecting company," Ivy whispered. Jack shook his head, inching toward the door with a flick of his wrist. The device unfolded into a small, buzzing drone that hovered just above his shoulder. He opened the door slowly, revealing a hooded figure standing in the doorway. The figure was tall and thin, their face obscured by the hood, but Ivy recognized the posture immediately. In at Jack's side, lowering the drone. What are you doing here? The assassin stepped into the workshop without an invitation, her movements swift and silent. She pulled back her hood, revealing sharp features and piercing green eyes that seemed to see everything at once. I heard you were dealing with shadows, she said, her gaze landing on Ivy. Ivy swallowed. Feeling the weight of Lena's scrutiny, she had met the assassin before briefly during one of Jack's less-than-legal dealings, but had never been comfortable around her. Lena moved like a predator, always calculating, always dangerous. We don't need your help, Ivy said, her voice firmer than she felt. Lena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You were wrong, she said. You were dealing with something far bigger than you realize. The shadows are tied to the cabal of the rift, and they won't stop until they've then torn this world apart. Jack frowned. The cabal that's just a myth. It's no myth, Lena said, her voice cold. And they know about you, Ivy. They know what you can do. If you want to survive, you're going to need me. Ivy hesitated, glancing at Jack, who looked just as conflicted. The air in the workshop felt heavy, charged with tension. Ivy knew that teaming up with an assassin was a risk, but if what Lena said was true, they were already in more danger than they realized. Fine, Ivy said, her voice steady, but we do this my way. We find out what the cabal wants, and we stop them. Lena nodded, a glint of approval in her eye. The trio stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their decisions settling over them. Ivy could feel the shadows stirring again, just beneath the surface, as if they too knew that this was only the beginning. Ivy felt the weight of the decision linger in the air as Lena blended into the shadows of Jack's workshop, her movements so silent, it was like she had melted into the wall. Jack busied himself at his workbench, tightening screws and adjusting the glowing crystals embedded into a small device. The tension between them, however, was palpable. Ivy's fingers twitched, the ever-present darkness hovering just out of sight, like a whisper in the back of her mind. I'm going to regret this, Jack muttered under his breath, giving one last glance toward the corner where Lena stood, her figure barely visible. He handed Ivy a small mechanical cube. This might help. A stabilizer Ivy been working on. It's designed to dampen magic, but maybe it can keep that shadow of yours under control. Ivy took the cube, feeling its faint hum in her hand. Thanks, but I'm not sure anything can stop what's happening. Jack ran a hand through his hair, clearly unnerved. Just don't go dark on me. Okay. Before Ivy could respond, Lena stepped forward. We need to move. The Syndicate won't sit idle once they catch wind of this. The Cabal already knows. We don't have time to waste. And nodded, slipping the stabilizer into her bag. Where do we go first? There's a place, Lena said, her voice low, an ancient temple deep in the forest. It's where the Shadow Guild used to gather. If we were going to find answers about the rift, we start there. Only couldn't he suppress the shiver that ran down her spine. And, this happened. Lena's eyes gleamed in the dim light. I have my way. Jack grabbed his jacket, and with a click, he summoned his drone, which floated obediently beside him. Great, into the creepy old forest we go. The journey out of Shadewell took them through winding, narrow streets that twisted and turned through the underbelly of the city. Ivy kept her hood pulled low, trying to ignore the sense of being watched. The shadows that lurked in the corners of her vision seemed to thrum with anticipation, as though they were aware of where she was going. She fought to keep them at bay, her breathing slow and controlled. The stabilizer cube pulsed softly in her bag, a reminder of the delicate balance she was teetering on. By the time they reached the city, outer limits, night had fully settled. The dark forest loomed ahead, its towering trees casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. The path was narrow, overgrown, and the air smelled damp and earthy. Lena took the lead, her steps silent and sure, while Jack, as drone floated behind, casting a faint glow ahead of them. This place has been abandoned for centuries, Lena said, her voice barely a whisper. But the magic here, ...
It never truly leaves.
Oh, wait, he nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Every step deeper into the forest seemed to stir something inside her. The shadows felt heavier, more alive. They pulsed with each heartbeat, growing harder to ignore. She clenched her fists, hoping the stabilizer would kick in soon. Suddenly, Lena stopped, raising a hand to signal silence. Ivy and Jack froze behind her. In the distance, a flicker of movement caught Ivy's eye, dark figures, darting between the trees, barely visible against the blackened forest. Company, Lena whispered, her voice like a knife in the darkness. Who? Ivy asked, her throat dry. Syndicate, Lena replied, and they ran out here for a friendly chat. The Syndicate of Innovators was ruthless. They saw magic as an outdated, dangerous force and had spent years consolidating power by controlling technology. But this tracking them into the forest meant they knew more than Ivy had feared. Her gut twisted. Jack's hand went to his side, where a small, intricate device hung from his belt. With a flick of his wrist, the device expanded into a gleaming crossbow, powered by a glowing crystal. We can let them catch us. Lena smirked, her fingers already tracing the hilt of a dagger hidden in her cloak. They won. The first Syndicate operative burst through the trees, dressed in sleek, dark armor fitted with mechanical enhancement. Before he could raise his weapon, Lena was on him. Her blade flashed, and the man crumpled silently to the ground. As I said, the heart pounded, but there was no time to hesitate. More operatives followed, their armor gleaming with technological superiority. Jack took aim with his crossbow, firing bolts charged with magical energy. The air buzzed with power as his shots hit their targets, sorting out the operatives and mechanical limbs and sending them crashing to the forest floor. But there were too many of them. Ivy could feel the pressure mounting. Her chest tightened as the shadows in her periphery twisted and writhed, eager to be unleashed. She clenched her fists, fighting the urge to let them loose. She didn't know what would happen if she did. We were getting surrounded, Jack yelled, his drone zipping through the trees, firing bursts of energy at the advancing operative. Lena moved like a ghost, cutting down enemies with lethal precision, but even she was being pushed back. Ivy's breathing grew ragged. The shadows swarmed around her, whispering promises of power, control. Just let go, they urged. She couldn't hold it back any longer. With a sharp exhale, she released the tight grip she had on herself. The shadows exploded outward, a wave of dark energy that swallowed the forest floor. The Syndicate operatives froze, their eyes wide with fear as the shadows crept up their legs, pulling them into the ground. The air crackled with dark magic as Ivy stood at the center of the storm, her arms raised, her eyes glowing with the power of the shadow realm. Jack and Lena watched stunned as the operatives were consumed by the shadows, disappearing into the abyss. The forest fell deathly, silent. Ivy felt the weight of the shadows pressing down on her, but this time she wasn't very afraid. She was in control, at least for now. Ani, Jax's voice broke through the silence, hesitant. What did you just do? Leaving only darkness in their wake. She blinked, the glow in her eyes fading. Her hands trembled as she looked at Jack and Lena, unsure of what to say. I don't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lena stepped forward, her expression unreadable. You were tapping into something ancient, she said, her eyes flicking to the remaining shadows lingering around Ivy. But you have to be careful if you lose control. Ali swallowed hard, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. She had unleashed the shadows and they had obeyed her, but the feeling of power was intoxicating, and she knew it wouldn't be easy to resist next time. Let's keep moving, Jack said, his voice tense. We need to get to the temple before more of them show up. And nodded, though her mind was still spinning. The shadows were part of her now, and the thought of that both terrified and exhilarated her. She followed Jack and Lena deeper into the forest, the path growing narrower and more overgrown as they neared the temple. By the time they reached the ancient stone structure, dawn was beginning to break over the horizon, casting a faint glow through the trees. The temple was massive, its walls covered in moss and vines with towering columns that seemed to touch the sky. The air here was thick with magic, and Ivy could feel the pull of the shadows more strongly than ever. Lena led them inside her steps, cautious but deliberate. The interior of the temple was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of magical runes etched into the wall. Ivy could feel the shadows shifting around her, alive, waiting. This is it, Lena said, her voice barely a whisper. The Shadow Guild was born here. If we were going to find answers, they were here. Jack moved ahead, scanning the walls with his mechanical device, looking for traps or hidden mechanism. O stayed back, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, something ancient and powerful. And then she felt it, a presence, cold and dark, creeping into her mind. The shadows stirred, and Ivy gasped, her hands flying to her head as the voice whispered in her ear, "Welcome, conduit." The words sent a chill down her spine, and Ivy stumbled, the shadows closing in around her. Jack and Lena turned alarmed, but Ivy couldn't speak. The voice in her mind grew louder, stronger, filling her with a sense of dread. "You are the key," the voice hissed. "You will open the rift." Ivy's vision blurred as the shadows took hold, pulling her deeper into their embrace. She tried to fight, but it was no use. The darkness was too strong, too overwhelming. The last thing she saw before everything went black was Jack rushing toward her, his face twisted in fear, and then there was nothing.